Thank you, Link. I particularly enjoy every opportunity I have to listen to Ambassador Link Bloomfield, as every time he speaks, I learn something. And I presume that some of you have learned something today by listening to his recitation, not of parables, but facts. And those are facts that you can take to the bank. As I was listening to Ambassador Bloomfield, I was asking myself, how did I get here? And why am I here? And I think the answer to that first question is, thank you. I think the answer to that first question is, I'm here because I was outraged 10 years ago when I first discovered the existence of a place called Camp Ashraf and the existence of an organization called MEK. I don't know why I didn't know anything about it, but it was never brought to my attention when I was National Security Advisor. And it wasn't really until I left the White House in 2010 and was made aware of the attack by the Iraqi uniformed military on Camp Ashraf on the day that our Secretary of Defense was visiting Iraq. And those videos, those tapes, which I still have, are some of the most outrageous things I think I've ever seen in my life. And it got worse. Because as I learned about the history of Camp Ashraf and the MEK and the people in Camp Ashraf, and I learned about the fact that the United States disarmed the 4,000 residents in return for a pass that some of you have that guaranteed that the United States was going to take care of the security of the residents of Ashraf. They assigned a number of very senior military officers to be the representatives of the government to Camp Ashraf, one of whom has dedicated his life to this issue, only to find that at the end of the day, when the president announced the withdrawal of American forces, those of us who asked the question is, what's going to happen to Ashraf? And said, well, we talked to the Maliki government, they're going to take care of it. They took care of Ashraf, all right. They continued brutal attacks. They killed innocent people, unarmed people. And this nightmare continued for several years. People like Governor Ridge and Ambassador Bloomfield and former secretaries of state, former members, directors of the FBI, former chairman of the Joint Chiefs, probably 75 or 80 people united in outrage against this. And yet, we continue to list the MEK as a terrorist organization, even when a US court directed the State Department to delist or show cause why they should be listed. They still dragged their feet. And it went on for much too long, but finally, at the end of the day, despite the failed promises of the move to Camp Liberty and the dragging of the feet to get Ashraf people relocated into Albania, we finally prevailed. But what a tremendous loss of life and what a horrible cost. So I grew up in post-war Europe. I was 2.5 years old when my parents moved to France in 1946. And I grew up looking at the United States, even though I was an American, I didn't really know what that was because I lived in Europe. But I looked at the United States from the outside in. And I had many friends when I was a young boy, and we used to say, what do you want to be when you grow up? And they would say, I want to be an American. I was an American, even though I didn't know what really that was, but I was very proud of the fact that despite the horrors of World War II, that the thing that America was remembered for was the good things, doing the right thing, doing the right thing. And as a young man, I learned to appreciate that and go through a few decades before I was old enough to decide after Georgetown University what I was going to do with my life. And I decided I wanted to be part of an organization that represented the country that did the right thing. Not just occasionally, but all the time. And if we didn't do it right, at least we admitted it and we tried to make amends and we tried to do the right thing. And so for 40 years, I served as a United States Marine in an organization representing a country that I believe always tried to do the right thing. On the history of Ashraf and the history of the people in that camp, I count that as a failure to do the right thing. A failure by the previous administration, a failure by people who were using the people of Camp Ashraf, in my view, as a pawn between the behavior of the regime that people were trying periodically through different administrations to nudge into doing the right thing when the regime had no intention of ever doing the right thing. And so 10 years later, I'm still here. And I'm still here remembering the outrage, remembering things like that. I'm still here because for the first time, we have hope. We have hope that in the not too distant future, that the regime will fall, democracy will come to Iran, and the people of Iran will live to see a brighter day. About 2 weeks ago, I got on an airplane at Dulles and I flew to Albania. And I had some appointments in Albania. I specifically did not tell Mrs. Rajavi and our friends that I was coming. And the reason I didn't is because I knew what extraordinary lengths they would go to make me feel welcome. I didn't want 1,000 people out there throwing flowers at me and saying welcome and everything else. So I said, you know what? I'm going to land. I'm going to check in at the hotel. I'm going to drive the hour or so it takes to get out there. I'm going to give them 1 hour. That's it. I'm going to tell them in 1 hour, I'd like to come. And that's what we did. And within that 1 hour, by the time I got there, and it pulled up at the gate at Ashraf 3, it was lined with people from, I don't know where you got everybody, but they were throwing flowers, they were singing, they were chanting. I walked into the auditorium, there were 3,000 people there, you know, like they've been rehearsing this for 3 weeks. I guarantee you the United States Marine Corps could not react that quickly to put on a production. So it was a great visit, and I congratulate everybody that had anything to do with bringing Ashraf 3 to life. It's a very impressive place with very impressive people. One of the things that I've noticed about the times that we live in is that we are back to an era where democracies are competing with autocracies. And I think this is very worrisome. I mean, certainly the regime is an autocracy, Russia is an autocracy, China is an autocracy, North Korea is an autocracy. But democracy is under attack in ways that we've never been under attack before. Because, like it or not, some of these autocracies are smart. The Chinese are smart. They know what they're doing. The Russians are, to me, Russia is a declining power. You know, they have oil, they have nuclear weapons, but that's about it. They have a GDP the size of New York State, maybe. But they're a nuisance. They're a strategic nuisance. But the Iranian regime is an extremely vile, extremely criminal regime. And we should have special contempt for them. And shame on any country that says that advertises itself as a democracy that doesn't call them out for what they are. Shame on them. We should never trade our values for economic gain. We should never do that. One of the things that concerns me a little bit in the international dialogue is during the Cold War, we used to talk about values. We used to talk about the evils of communism in terms of human suffering. But I don't hear that discussion that much anymore. And I think that the United States should lead a resurgence among democratic countries and organizations like NATO and the European Union and elsewhere to start talking about values and to shine a spotlight on people who trade, who subordinate their values in favor of trade relations with a country like China. And I think that that's important to do. I would say that there are a couple of things in addition to Ambassador Bloomfield's eloquent speech. There are a couple of things that I think I would recommend, and I've spoken to Mrs. Rajavi about this already. I think it's time, first of all, we should never forget our history. I think you should show the history. I think every name deserves the dignity of being remembered, and you're doing an absolutely superb job. But I really do think that hope is coming. I really do think that the regime is more vulnerable now than it ever has been, and that there will be an end to this, and it will come sooner rather than later, hopefully. So my question is, what's going to happen the day after the regime falls? And on that score, I think we need to be much more effective in terms of answering that question. To our staff members here, and to our senators, to our congressmen, to our White House, this ought to be something that is discussed now. We made that mistake in Iraq when we invaded Iraq without any kind of future plan. We should not make that mistake in Iran. The NCRI is a coalition that has democratically elected a leader. They have Jeffersonian democratic principles. It is something that we should celebrate. And frankly, the next time we meet here, there should be standing room only, and we should have as many members of Congress and the Senate in this room as we possibly can. It's that important. So those plans, I think, should be broadcast. I think it should be broadcast to the people in Iran. What is going to happen the day after the regime falls? I think the regime would like to know that. But I know the people would gather a great deal of motivation to keep up the struggle, and we should broadcast that plan throughout the democratic countries that support the NCRI and its democratically elected leaders. So, yes, over 10 years, outrage replaced by great hope, and I look forward to being with you in Tehran one of these days soon. Thank you.